Okay, guys, welcome. Today we're going to talk about operating with signed numbers, and we'll also touch a little bit on exponents as well. Okay, so what I mean by operating with signed numbers, we're going to talk about how to add and subtract, multiply and divide, potentially if you have negative numbers involved. Right, this is something that we'll need going forward, so it's important that we touch on it now. Okay, so we say that negative a and a are opposites. Basically, if they are the same distance from 0 on a number line, but in opposite directions, right? So a might be up here, negative a might be here, right? But if you look at this distance, distance is always positive, so the distance for both of these is a, right? Whatever a might be 2 or something. But that's what we mean by opposite numbers. You'll also see that they're sometimes said to be negatives of each other, but I usually prefer opposite because negative sort of implies that, one is like the first one has to be positive and the second one has to be negative, but that's not necessarily true. Okay, so first of all, how do we add with signed numbers? Well, if the two numbers have the same sign, you're going to ignore the sign and just add the two numbers. All right, so if they're both positive or both negative, you're just going to add the two numbers. And then the answer will just have the same sign as the original number. All right, if the signs are different, you're going to ignore the signs and subtract the numbers and then keep the sign of the larger number. All right, so let's take a look at how that works. So part A is easy, that's just 6, right? 2 plus 4 is 6. Now in part B, you have 2 plus negative 4. All right, well, here you have unlike signs. So now you want to do 4 minus 2, which is 2. And since the 4 is the bigger number, you want to keep that negative sign there. So that would be a negative 2. All right, part C, now they're both negative. You have negative 2 plus negative 4. So now here the signs are the same, so you're going to add 2 and 4 and get 6, but you're going to keep the negative sign. All right, part D, now you have negative 2 plus positive 4. All right, and of course negative 2, or sorry, the signs are different, so we're going to subtract, so we get a 2. But now the negative is on the 2, which is a smaller number, so I want to keep the positive number in this case. All right, part E, a little bit more tricky. We have 3 plus negative 5 plus a negative 2. Now inside the parentheses, you have two negative numbers. So you're going to add them and keep the sign. So that will become a negative 7. Now we have opposite signs. So we have positive 3 and negative 7. So if I add them, so if I subtract them, I get a 4. And then I want to keep the sign of the bigger number. So I want a negative there. All right, for part F, same idea. I want to worry about the inside of those parentheses first. So if I add negative 4 and negative 7, that will give me a negative 11. Oops, don't need Siri. So I have a negative 11 plus 3. And of course, that will give me a negative 8. All right, and then for part G, we just have a 0 thrown in there. So 8 plus 0. If you add 0 to anything, you're not changing it, so that's still 8. All right, so 0 is technically neither positive nor negative. All right, so that's sort of, but that's easy, right? You just keep it the same. Okay, now to do subtraction, what you're going to do is you're going to utilize this property. We're just going to convert it to addition, right? And really what this is called is, when I was little, I learned this was like the property where you add a line and change the sign, right? Because if you take this a minus b and you add a plus sign there, you add a line, and you just change the sign of that second number, and that's exactly what we have, right? So that's one thing that you can use. All right, so let's take a look. So if it's just 7 minus 4, right, that's easy, that's 3. But if you have 10 minus a negative 6, like we do in part B, If you add a line and change the sign, you got now 10 plus 6, so that's 16. In part C, you have negative 8 minus 2, but if you add a line and change the sign, these are both negative numbers, so we're going to add them. 8 and 2 is 10, and keep the signs in negative 10. Part D, we have negative 5 minus a negative 4. Add a line, change the sign. Now we have one positive, one negative, so we're going to subtract them. 5 minus 4 is 1, and I want to keep the negative since that's attached to the bigger number. Part E, we have negative 7 minus a negative 7. If I add a line and change the sign, I now have negative 7 plus 7. So if I subtract those, I'm going to get 0. All right, and there's no need to worry about a sign here. All right, and then of course for F, we have negative 2 minus 5 plus 6. So if I worry about the parentheses first, I can add a line and change the sign in here. They're both negative, so I add them, and I keep the negative. So negative 7 plus 6, so again, subtract, I'll get 1, keep the negative sign, and I got negative 1. All right, so this is something that you maybe have seen before, but if not, or if you're a little rusty with it, this is definitely a good thing to sort of refresh. All right, now when it comes to multiplying and dividing positive and negative numbers, if they have the same sign, you're going to end up with a positive number. So if it's positive times positive, you end up with positive. If it's negative times negative, you also end up with positive. And then, of course, if they're different, if it's plus times minus, that will be minus. Or if it's minus times plus, you'll also get minus. All right, so let's do a couple. So in part A, we have 4 times a negative 1 over 5. Right? Well, I can think of 4 as 4 over 1. I'm doing a positive times a negative, so I know the answer is negative. And now we just have to multiply across. So 4 times 1 is 4. 1 times 5 is 5. So this is negative 4 over 5. Right? Part B, we have a negative 2 over 3 times a negative 3, which we'll think of as negative 3 over 1. Here we have negative times negative, so this will give us a positive. Right? And of course here, we could say that the 3's will cancel, and we're just going to be left with 2 over 1, which is just 2. Okay, part C, we have a negative 4 divided by 8. All right, so a negative divided by a positive is still negative. All right, and here we just have to reduce. If I divide the top and bottom by 4, I'm going to get a 1 over 2. So this is negative 1/2. All right, part D, we have negative 16 over negative 24, but I have negative divided by negative, so this is going to be a positive. And then if we divide the top and bottom by 8, we're going to get a 2 over 3. All right, for part E, we have a negative 5 times a 1 over 4. So we have negative times positive, so this is negative. If I put this over 1, I'm going to get that this is negative 5 over 4. All right, and then finally, part F, 18 over negative 2 will, of course, be negative, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. So we get negative 9. All right, now I thought it was in this section, but maybe it's in a later section. But I just want to mention here that if you have something like negative 1 over 2, or 1 over negative 2, or the negative just out front, negative 1 over 2, these are all the same. All right, these all mean the same thing. However, usually the one that we prefer is this one. We usually prefer to write the negative out front. All right, so if you see that, all 3 of those mean the same thing, but usually it's preferred to write it in that last form there. Okay, let's look at some algebraic expressions now where we look at some negative numbers. So if we plug in In A, we're going to have a 2 times a negative 1 plus x, so negative 1 minus 1, over y, so negative 1 plus 2. And if we simplify, this is negative 2 plus, and then negative 1 minus 1. If I add a line and change the sign, they're both negative, so I add them. Keep the sign, I got a negative 2. And the bottom, I subtract, keep the sign of the bigger number, and I'm going to get 1. So this just comes to be negative 2 plus negative 2, which is going to be negative 4. All right, in part B, we have negative 3 times 2 times x, which is negative 1, minus y, which is negative 1. And here's where you want to be careful with your parentheses. Plus negative 4, and then a 2y, which is negative 1, minus x, which is negative 1. All right, so now we have some simplifying to do. So if I go inside this parentheses, I get negative 2, add a line, change the sign, plus 1. If I go inside this parentheses, I'm going to get negative 2, again, add a line, change the sign, plus 1. All right, well, negative 2 plus 1 for both of these is just going to give me a negative 1. And when I multiply by negative 1, this is going to become 3 plus 4, so we get 7. All right, part C, we have a negative, negative y, so negative 1. So if we go inside this parentheses, we have a lot of negatives to worry about. But if we add a line and change the sign, that's going to become a 1. And then we just have that negative out front, so this is just negative 1. All right, so that's that example. All right, the last thing that we'll touch on is what do we mean by exponents? Essentially, exponents are just used to indicate that you have repeated multiplication, right? So if you wanted to say 3 multiplied by itself 5 times, we could write that as 3 to the 5th power, right? And of course, in general, you could say if you want a to the n, you just multiply a by itself n times, right? All right. And then, of course, the number that is here is called the base, and then the little number up to the side is called the exponent. All right, so let's look at a couple examples of these. So in part A, we have 2 to the 6, which is just 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. And if you multiply these together, you'll find that that's 64. Right? In part B, you have 0.1 to the 3rd, which is 0.1 times 0.1 times 0.1. All right, now on this one, you're really just moving the the decimals over, right? So 0.1 times 0.1 is a 0.01. And then I want to multiply it by 0.1 again, so that's going to give me a 0.001. All right, for part C, I have negative 2 to the 4th, which is negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. All right, well, I have all these negatives, but these two would make a positive, and so would these. So I'm left with positive times positive, so my result is going to be a positive. And then if I do 2 times 2, I get 4, times 2 more, I get 8, times 2 more, I get 16. So this is a positive 16. All right, now in part D, last but not least, we have negative 5 to the 3rd, which is negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5. Now in this case, these two, yeah, they'll make a positive again, but this doesn't have anything to multiply with. So you have a positive times negative, so this is definitely negative. And then 5 times 5 is 25, times 5 more, 125. So this will give us a negative 125. Okay, so that concludes this video on operating with signed numbers and exponents. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.